They told me three things before the bell. Don't embarrass the kid, don't make it look easy, and smile for the cameras when it's over. I'd heard some version of that speech in gyms from Tampa to Tacoma, and I always nodded the same way, calm, unhurried, already doing the math on how many rounds my knees could give them before the check cleared. Nobody warned me about the woman in the cream blazer leaning over the ropes to tell my 9-year-old that his sign was an embarrassment. Milo had painted it himself the night before, hunched over the kitchen table with his tongue between his teeth, block letters on poster board. My dad goes the distance. He'd run out of red paint halfway through distance and finished it in blue without complaint, prouder of that crooked color change than anything else he'd ever made. He held it up at ringside the way other kids hold a flag at a parade, both hands, chin up, daring anyone to tell him it didn't belong there. The woman in the blazer, Veronica Lang, her name stitched in gold thread over her heart, CEO of the apparel company whose logo covered every square foot of the arena, looked at the sign the way you'd look at gum stuck to your shoe. "Get that out of the camera frame," she said to the man beside her, not bothering to lower her voice. "It's filler. We don't pay for filler in the shot." Then, almost as an afterthought, glancing down at Milo, "Cute, sweetheart. Sit down. I've been called worse." Filler was, if I'm honest, close to my actual job description. Lang Performance had flown in confetti cannons and a 19-year-old undefeated prospect named Dario Vance. And what they needed standing across the ring from him was a body who could survive 10 rounds on national television without making the kid look like anything less than spectacular. That body was me. I'd done the job 11 times in 3 years for 4 different companies, under 3 different ring names, and I was good at it. Good enough that nobody ever stopped long enough to ask who I used to be. At the weigh-in that afternoon, a producer had asked me to stand a half step behind Dario for the photo so the size difference reads better, and I'd done it without a word because that, too, was the job. I'd swallowed plenty that day already. I had room for exactly none of it left over for my son. But nobody talks to my son that way. Milo didn't cry. He just folded the sign down against his chest so the blue letters disappeared. Careful, the way I'd taught him to fold a flag, like it still mattered even when nobody was watching. That was worse than tears. I felt it land somewhere behind my back teeth and stay there. I hadn't always been a man other men's gyms rented by the night. There was a time before Rosalind died and the Bills stopped caring how I felt about it, when I'd been ranked, when trainers from 3 states called my house to ask about my schedule instead of my availability. I gave that up on purpose. The week after the funeral, the same week, I learned Milo couldn't fall asleep unless somebody was in the room down the hall. A man can chase a title, or he can be home most nights to read one more chapter before lights out. I made my peace with which one mattered years ago. Somewhere between the cemetery and the first morning, I had to learn how to pack a school lunch without her notes tucked inside the bag, back when I still stood in that kitchen wondering if I was doing any of it right. What I hadn't made peace with, apparently, was a stranger calling my son's handwriting garbage to his face, in front of cameras, on a night I'd specifically taken so I could afford his class trip in the spring. Earl Dunmore, my corner man for 9 years, and the only person left who called me by my full name, caught my eyes in the dressing room mirror and didn't ask what was wrong. He'd seen my face do this exactly twice before. He just laced my gloves half an inch tighter than usual and said, "You're not filler tonight, Gideon. Go remind them what that word actually costs." Dario Vance came out of his corner the way undefeated 19-year-olds always do. Fast hands, faster smile, already playing to the cameras before the bell had finished ringing. He caught me twice in the first 10 seconds, clean shots, the kind meant to end a night early and look magnificent doing it. I let him own the center of the ring, because that's the job I was paid for. I covered, I rolled, I made him work for nothing. The same quiet dance I performed for 4 companies running, the dance that kept the checks coming and the headlines kind of everyone, but me. Between rounds 1 and 2, Earl leaned through the ropes and wiped my face like always, but his eyes weren't on the cut. There wasn't one. They were on Milo, 3 rows back, sign folded against his chest, watching his father get hit on television for money. "You don't owe them a beating," Earl said. "You don't owe them anything. But you might owe him a few rounds he can be proud of." I didn't answer. I just stood up off the stool when the bell rang and went back to absorbing a fast, talented kid's best work. Same as round one. Same as the plan we'd been paid to follow. By the third round, something in me decided I was finished dancing. I started walking him down instead of riding the ropes. Small steps, the kind nobody in the cheap seats notices, but every trainer in the building does. I cut the ring into smaller and smaller pieces until Dario had nowhere fast left to go. He was good, genuinely good. Fast hands, a sharp boxing brain for 19. But speed without a map only get a man so far against someone who spent half his life learning the floor plan. In the fourth, I slip a right hand I had no business slipping clean and answered it with a left hook that turned his legs to rubber for exactly 1 second. Old instinct, 15 years buried, pulling the punch a half-inch short of his shin before I'd even decided to. I could have ended it right there. I didn't. He was 19, and somebody's son too, on a night that wasn't his fault. By the fifth, Dario had stopped smiling at the cameras between exchanges. By the sixth, his corner was shouting instructions he wasn't fast enough anymore to use, because I'd stopped letting him set the pace an hour into a fight everyone in the building had assumed would be over in 3. From the far corner, I heard Dario's trainer, a white-haired man named Sal Pruitt who'd been around the sport since before I was born, mutter something to his cut man that carried clean through a lull in the crowd noise. I know that lead hand. I haven't seen that lead hand since the Mid-Atlantic Finals. 61-1, wasn't it? Before he stopped himself there, like he didn't quite trust the name forming in his own mouth, and looked at me the way you look at a photograph you'd filed undergone. By the 7th round, Veronica Lang had put her phone down. By the 8th, the production truck had stopped cutting away from me during replays. By the 9th, the arena, half empty and indifferent at the opening bell, had started making the kind of noise that has nothing to do with which corner paid for the lights. Not for Dario. For the arithmetic nobody in that building could explain. How a man hired specifically to lose convincingly kept finding rounds he had no earthly right to win. When the final bell rang, Dario did something his own corner clearly hadn't trained him to do. He crossed the ring before the photographer had even framed the shot, touched both gloves to mine, and set it just for me under the noise. Nobody told me you could do that. Nobody asks, I said. It was the truest thing I'd said all night, and I watched it land on him like he understood, for the first time, that there were whole lives standing across rings from people like him that nobody ever bothered to read. I hadn't even toweled off before I saw Preston Cale, Lang's head of marketing, working his way toward my corner with a leather folder under his arm and a smile that hadn't been sincere since college. Veronica Lang followed a step behind him, already composing the next sentence she planned to sell me. The way she'd sold the cameras a confetti cannon and the crowd a manufactured underdog story an hour earlier. That was quite a night, she said, like she'd discovered something valuable in a clearance bin. We'd like to keep telling that story. A multi-year deal. House fighter, brand ambassador, the comeback nobody saw coming. We'd handle the messaging, of course. You'd never have to explain who you used to be again. We'll do it for you, properly this time, with a budget behind it. It was on paper more money than I'd earned across the last 4 years combined. Enough to move Milo to a better school district. Enough to fix the truck without thinking twice about it. I let myself hold that number for exactly as long as it took to look past her shoulder. Milo had come back to my side while she talked. The sign unfolded again, blue letters bright under the work lights, held the way you hold something you've decided to stop apologizing for. He wasn't looking at the folder. He was looking at me, waiting to see which man I was going to be now that the room had finally noticed. I thought about every gym in every city where somebody else had decided what story I was allowed to tell about myself, and how close I'd just come to letting one more person do it, only this time with better lighting. Not for sale, I said. Veronica blinked, like the words hadn't parsed the way she'd expected them to. I'm sorry. My son painted that sign because he believes it's true, I said. I'm not handing either one of you the right to decide what it means. He's not filler. Neither am I. And I'd rather drive him to school myself than let a contract tell him otherwise. Something shifted behind her eyes. Not anger. Something closer to arithmetic of her own. The slow realization that she'd just watched the best story of her entire career walk toward the parking lot exit because she'd called a 9-year-old's handwriting filler 40 minutes earlier and never once imagined the bill would come due in front of cameras she controlled. Preston Cale's smile finally gave up the effort altogether. Sal Pruitt passed behind her on his way out with Dario's gear bag over one shoulder, and he didn't slow down, but he said it loud enough that she alone would hear it. "Some things you can't buy back, Ms. Lang. Not once you've already told a man, and his boy, that they were nothing." She didn't answer him. She didn't answer me, either. She just stood there holding a leather folder full of money for a story that had already finished writing itself without her. Dario was still in his ring gear, towel around his neck, watching the whole exchange from a few feet off. He didn't say anything to Veronica. He walked over to Milo instead, crouched down to his level, and pointed at the sign. "Your dad really did go the distance," he said. "Toughest 10 rounds of my life, and I've still got 18 wins to prove I usually don't need that many." Milo looked up at me like he'd just been handed the second best thing that happened all night, and I decided I didn't mind sharing the first. In the truck, Milo unfolded the sign the rest of the way across his lap and smoothed out the crease where he'd hidden it against his chest for the better part of an hour. "Did you go the distance, Dad?" "Every round," I said. He studied the blue letters for a second, satisfied with that answer and the simple arithmetic of a 9-year-old. And then he looked up at me with the particular seriousness he reserved for things that mattered. "Good. Then it wasn't filler. It wasn't. It never had been. Some things just take the right room, the right 15 years, and one good night for the rest of the world to finally agree." Earl called the next morning before I'd even had coffee, laughing about 3 different gyms, phoning him asking for my real name. I told him there wasn't a real name to give them. Just a man who'd finally stopped letting other people write the only one that mattered. Milo's sign is taped to his bedroom wall now, blue letters and all, right above where he does his homework, where he can see it every night before he turns off the light. Some nights I stand in his doorway and read it myself, just to remember. It was never about going 10 rounds with anybody's prospect. It was about going the distance with the only judge whose scorecard I ever actually needed. A 9-year-old boy who believed me before anyone else in that arena bothered to look twice.